Lord of the Rings meets anime in this latest movie, but is it worth the quality that surfaces from it? Hello and welcome to Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below, have you seen Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your thoughts, or if this review helps decide if you're going to see it or not. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community, where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole, and getting right into the synopsis. 183 years before the events of the original trilogy, Wolf is at odds with Helm Hammerhound, which puts them into a last stand against each other, whereas Hera must face on her best friend from her past and figure out how to gather up her will. And taking it right into positive, bringing Lord of the Rings into this anime style brings a fresh style that's colorful and vibrant with the way they manage to utilize all of the animation flow, how you utilize the camera, and do different things that you can't always do the same way within live action. And so that is a fresh take that I do appreciate with that. And for me, I'm not necessarily an anime lover or someone that watches anime very often. I have seen some anime movies, and so this is something that I do appreciate in the sense that it could be a step in the right direction for a gateway into anime for people that don't watch anime at all, and so they can watch something that has a familiar name, Lord of the Rings, and be able to understand whether they would appreciate more anime from that or not, or if they're just sticking with this because it's only Lord of the Rings attached. But either way, there's some interesting ways that go about the characters, certain moments here and there that have great battles, something that gets your engagement up a notch. And so the way they go about all this different ways of adding these different styles, different looks at the works of Peter Jackson, how they utilize his world, and it's already a tough competition for what he has set the standard with that original trilogy in 2003, and how that all comes about in anime style form. You may not always expect the same style or quality of story, especially adapting from the book, especially taking this as a prequel to that, where there's no source material to begin with. They sort of have to add in suggestions or nods to what's going to come up. So there's something to be said about what you can get out of it, little treats and nuggets of Easter eggs that nod toward the original, that really builds up the stamina of what you can get out of the action, the colorful, vibrant characters. There's not necessarily anything that builds upon the religious or allegories that is going about with the original trilogy or within The Hobbit, within the original context that we got from the Christian writer, that was from the original source material. But there is something that is fantasy-like, and it still has moments that are feeling like they're coming from Lord of the Rings without feeling like they're totally ripping off the soundtrack or pulling anything that's too on the nose with what it's doing as a whole. Which takes me right into mixed elements, which there are some moments here and there that can feel like too much of a tug and pull at what's going on with whether you're going to like how much references to the original trilogy there are, making it so suggestive in what it's all going about. Especially near the end, there's just a lot of different references that don't necessarily need to be explained. This can be its own story, but when it sort of goes about and talks about the original trilogy now and then, it feels like it's not being able to hold its own story, feeling like it can trust the audience to accept this as its own thing. And so in order to make broad suggestions that this is a prequel, it keeps mentioning Helm's Deep, Gandalf, Saruman, and things that go about along the way. Yes, it's not mentioning those things every second or whatever, but even mentioning them once alludes to a strong suggestion of how it's trying to make you aware of where it takes place in the timeline, which can be good to some regard, having some references, but the way it can go about multiple different things can throw something off to whether you'll love that about it or just not attach yourself to it. And there is this generic basis to some of the story that isn't always feeling like it's Lord of the Rings-esque, and so that's where it takes its own fantasy style that can be good in some sense, but doesn't necessarily always have a flat out energy that builds upon this tension, builds upon the stakes, where there's certain moments where you don't necessarily always feel like the characters are in danger, or nothing's always engaging every second of the time. And so even though you have this new sort of style anime taking it to Lord of the Rings, it doesn't necessarily feel like it has a particular flair that makes it extra special, that deserves its anime placement outside of a director likely being on the side of wanting to make an anime movie because they like anime themselves. So it just sort of feels like a thing that was a nod in, a throw in order to do something, adding in more Lord of the Rings, but not necessarily sacrificing or making too many risks with the way they're going about telling the story, with also the suggestion that this is based in comparison to something great that Peter Jackson has already done with the live action movies, and trying to touch on that by creating a prequel to those in this anime form just doesn't always compare well when you're looking at it with the broad strokes that it paints. And taking it right into negatives, there's quite a few moments here and there that show suggestion that there's a Mary Sue involved, someone that's overpowered, and especially with Hera, what we're going about with that, and also Hammerhand at times. There's something about those characters that they obviously are going to survive, but when the circumstances put them at hand to what's all going on with the script, with the story, it puts things in a higher risk sort of danger that they shouldn't be able to fend themselves off so easily. And so in order to fix that problem, you just make the problem less eventful, or something that's not so big of an attack on them that they're able to survive so easily, or different circumstances that contrive their survival or provide them plot armor in order to lead on with the story. There's certain things that does surprise you with how things flow about with that manner, but at the same time, that's where when you put the Mary Sue plot armor on them, or any of the characters that are expected to survive or lead on with the sense of generic nature that this story holds, ultimately it takes away some of the endangerment or some of the sense of believability, the suspense of belief that you can just latch on to this story, have the sense of risk that's going on with all the steps that they're taking, the sense of survivability that's going on within the cave, and how that all comes about just leads into some character dynamics that work. But at the same time, about the first hour of this movie, it didn't have me fully engaged, fully hooked into all the different events that are going about. There's different feuds, different conflicts here and there, but the generic sense of the fantasy story that didn't always have the Lord of the Rings flavor, obviously there's a big comparison, but that's the risk of touching on that franchise to begin with, is living up to something that's already been great before, and especially when they add in all these little nods, these references, and not necessarily trying to make it twisted in a clever way or have a purpose to tying in the original to what they're doing within this prequel. Ultimately, there's certain things that don't sustain themselves quite as well, or ask for the service that manages to hold its own without touching on what's going on in the future of the storyline as a whole. So that's just my personal review for Lord of the Rings War of Rohirrim, which I have to rate as simply 5.5 out of 10. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the movie, or if you're going to see it or not see it based on my personal review. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it somewhere right in the middle? Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.